The world will shortly bear witness to the 51st anniversary of Turkey's illegal, barbaric and unprovoked invasion of Cyprus. The heinous Turkish invasion, which comprised two stages, Attila I, 20th of July 1974, and Attila II, 14th of August 1974, both of which were supported covertly by the British and American establishments, constituted a calamity for Cyprus, the Greek Cypriot people, who made up approximately 80% of the island's population, the Greek identity of the island, which has its origins in ancient Greece, and the historic Christian character of the island. The Turkish invasion was also a calamity for the United Nations Charter and international law in general. Immediately following their victory on the battlefield, the Turks partitioned the island, illegally occupying the north, which they have continued to do for 51 years now. As it stands today, approximately 36% of Cyprus's sovereign territory is illegally occupied by hordes of Turkish soldiers, along with Turkish Islamist and Turkish nationalist paramilitary troops. Furthermore, immediately following the Turkish invasion, the Turks commenced with ethnic cleansing, in which approximately 200,000 Greek Cypriots were forcibly and ruthlessly expelled from the north of Cyprus, resulting in them becoming refugees in their own country. Since then, the Turkish state has illegally settled in the occupied part of Cyprus hundreds of thousands of Turks and some Kurds, who were transferred from Turkey. By completely changing the demographics of the occupied part of Cyprus, Turkey aims to ensure that never again can this part of the island be Greek or Christian, or come under the jurisdiction of Greek Cypriots. On the back of the Turkish invasion, and in conjunction with its policy of ethnic cleansing, the Turkish state has virtually erased all signs of Greek cultural heritage in the occupied part. Thus, Greek Orthodox churches have either been destroyed, desecrated, closed, used as stables or storage facilities, or, as is frequently the case, converted into mosques. In addition to that, Greek cemeteries have been desecrated or left to rot. And in one instance, Greek gravestones were used as coffee tables. Further, the original Greek names of cities, towns and villages in the occupied part have been given Turkish names. The ethnic cleansing of the Greek population in the occupied part of Cyprus, along with the destruction of Greek cultural heritage there, demonstrates the traditional Turkish hatred of Greeks and Christianity. Lest us forget that the Turks committed, almost concurrent to each other, two genocides against two Christian nations: the Armenian genocide from 1915 to 1923, in which approximately 1.5 million Armenian men, women and children were systematically murdered by the Turks, and the Greek genocide from 1914 to 1923, where approximately 1.2 million Greek men, women and children were systematically murdered by the Turks. It should be noted that the British state, which has a long history of engaging in and encouraging genocide denial, denies the Armenian genocide and the Greek genocide. Returning to the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, approximately 1,500 Greeks remain missing to this day, presumed dead, while many Greek women were raped by marauding mobs of Turkish soldiers. As he has over centuries gone by, the Turkish soldier brought murder, rape, carnage and destruction to Cyprus in 1974. Before I move on, I wish to refute, and emphatically so, the official Turkish explanation for the invasion in 1974, a so-called explanation which has been peddled by Western mainstream media for over 5 decades now. So, Greece, Turkey and Britain are guarantor powers of Cyprus's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Accordingly, if the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity is threatened, then those guarantor powers are permitted to militarily intervene to maintain Cyprus's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, moving on. The military junta of Greece, which sought union with Cyprus, Enesis, overthrew the legitimate president of Cyprus, Makarios, on the 15th of July 1974. The Turks then invaded on the 20th of July 1974 to, as they claimed, restore the status quo in Cyprus. The man whom the Greek military junta replaced Makarios with, Nikos Samson, resigned 8 days later on the 23rd of July 1974, owing to enormous public protests against him by the Greek Cypriot population. Then on the 24th of July 1974, the military junta in Greece fell from power. In short, 3 days into the first stage of the Turkish invasion, Attila I, the status quo on the island had been restored, what with the return to power of Makarios. Thus, the Turks could have claimed that Attila I has defended the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Cyprus, hence Turkish soldiers are heading back to Turkey. But Turkish soldiers did not return to Turkey. Quite the contrary, in fact. Turkish soldiers continued their advance in Cyprus, and then, on the 14th of August 1974, Turkey initiated its second invasion of Cyprus, Attila II, in which Turkish forces dramatically expanded their control of the north of Cyprus. So, to anyone, Turk or non-Turk, who says that, that Turkey invaded Cyprus on the 20th of July 1974 to restore the status quo, puts the following question to them. Why then Attila II? I assure you, they will have a gormless look on their face, followed by cackling and waffling. It is the case that Turkey, which long harboured territorial designs on Cyprus, was waiting for a pretext to fulfil their designs. And the pretext came with the overthrow of Makarios. As I said at the start of this talk, it will soon be 51 years since the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. It is regrettable that so few people across the world are aware of Turkey's criminal invasion of Cyprus and its subsequent ethnic cleansing of Greek Cypriots and its destruction of Greek cultural heritage in the occupied area. The cardinal factor for that unawareness is Turkey's status as a key friend and ally to the Western ruling elites. Accordingly, Western mainstream media which is controlled by the elites, barely utters a word about the criminality and murderous nature of the Turkish invasion and occupation of the north of Cyprus. And when the useful idiots who comprise Western mainstream media do say something relating to the catastrophic events of 1974, it is always slanted in favour of Turkey, either implicitly or explicitly. However, there is another factor, and a very major one at that. Today, Cyprus is neither free nor independent, and it never really has been, in spite of the so-called independence which Britain granted Cyprus in 1960. In short, the British establishment never left Cyprus. And by that, I am not merely referring to the British overseas territories in Cyprus, Akrotiri and Kelia, which house British military bases. No. I am referring to the political and economic landscapes in Cyprus, which the British establishment, along with the American establishment, controls. It follows, therefore, that the Cypriot establishment is a puppet of the Western ruling elites. The evidence of that is overwhelming. Firstly, the Cypriot establishment implements woke policies in what is the free part of Cyprus, the part not occupied by the Turks. So, for example, there is mass immigration to Cyprus, resulting in demographic and cultural changes which will have far-reaching consequences for the Greek Cypriot population. Secondly, the Cypriot establishment has given key industries and natural resources to the British and American establishments, as well as others, such as the mining industry and the oil and gas sectors. Thirdly, the Cypriot establishment follows the foreign policy line of the Western ruling elites. Hence, for example, it supports the Zelensky government, imposed sanctions on Russia, supports Israel, and sided with the Islamist insurgency in Syria from 2011 to 2024. And fourthly, the Cypriot establishment never holds the British and American establishments responsible for the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, even though the evidence to the contrary is irrefutable. Indeed, the Cypriot establishment is sickeningly obsequious in its dealings with the British and American elites, constantly proclaiming itself to be a loyal and trustworthy partner to the West. When listening to the words of the Cypriot establishment vis-à-vis the Turkish invasion, it is as if the British and the Americans do not even exist, as if the British and the Americans do not and never have had strategic partnerships with Turkey, as if primary source evidence does not exist in London and in Washington which demonstrates the British and the Americans were complicit in the Turkish invasion. The Cypriot establishment is unashamedly at the service of the Western ruling elites, though it is also at the service of the Israelis, the Saudis, and other Arab Gulf states. Thus, there is a reason why Cyprus is known as the whore of the Mediterranean. But there is an even more diabolical side to the Cypriot establishment. Through its control of the media and education system, the Cypriot establishment downplays the Turkish occupation of the north of Cyprus. So, for instance, whereas it was once written in school textbooks, never forgive, never forget, in the context of the Turkish invasion, Today's textbooks pathetically say, never forget. Furthermore, the current so-called president of Cyprus, a one Nikos Christodoulides, recently invited Turkish President Erdogan to visit the free part of Cyprus, even though Turkey does not recognise the Republic of Cyprus. That is quite a remarkable development and demonstrates that this invitation is part and parcel of cementing forever the Turkish occupied part of the north of Cyprus, which is exactly what the Western ruling elites wish to see. A truly independent, self-respecting president would never invite an enemy to his or her country which the enemy does not recognise. It is standard procedure for two enemies to meet in a third country. Also, the Cypriot establishment has never once made a complaint to the British about the presence in London of a de facto embassy of the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Not once. Just think about that. In 1983, the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which in reality is Turkey, unilaterally proclaimed its independence, something which has zero legal standing under international law and which is recognised by no country in the world save Turkey. And yet, the British state permits the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to have a diplomatic presence on British soil. Need I say more about Perfidious Albion, as well as the hideously subservient Cypriot establishment? There are, of course, many other cases which demonstrate the nefarious and duplicitous nature of the Cypriot establishment, but I will leave it to you to learn of those cases. Turning now to the Greek Cypriot diaspora. My advice to that diaspora is as follows. Think independently. Think critically. Do not be gullible. Do not be naive. Do not be obsequious to Western mainstream politicians. And do not think that having photographs with Western officials and Western mainstream politicians makes you important, because it does not. It means diddly squat. And do not think, too, that having Western mainstream politicians at your meetings as guest speakers makes you important, because it does not. Again, it means diddly squat. Furthermore, show respect to the Greek Cypriots who were ethnically cleansed, murdered and raped by the Turks. Hence, do not bring up Cypriot hospitality and Cypriot food and drink in your political meetings. Such references are disgraceful. My final piece of advice to the Greek Cypriot diaspora is as follows. If you are patriots or nationalists, as you claim to be, and if you are living in the UK, make a point of the following facts and do so loud and clear. Firstly, that the British state played a major role in the Turkish invasion, as well as the subsequent Turkish occupation of the north of Cyprus, and continues to do so to this very day. And secondly, that the British state allows the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which it does not recognise, to have a diplomatic presence in London. On the back of that, ask your MPs to table early day motions and send letters to the Foreign Office about Britain's role in the Turkish invasion, and that Britain allows the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to have a diplomatic presence on British soil. I was the one who, many years ago, alerted you to the de facto embassy in London of the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Hence, do something about it. And while you are doing that, you can also ask your MPs to table an early day motion and write a letter to the Foreign Office saying that the UK failed to honour its status as a guarantor power of Cyprus by having not militarily intervened in 1974 to counter the Turkish invasion, and ask why the UK did not use force to prevent Turkey from violating the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Cyprus. In concluding, I say this to Greek Cypriots, wherever they may be residing in the world. The ancient Greeks had a maxim, know thyself. To that I add, know thy enemy. The greatest threat to Cyprus today is not Turkey, but rather is an insidious one, and it is at home. Cyprus is plagued by the same threat that every other Western country is contending with at present. Unless you know thy enemy, Cyprus will cease to exist. Thank you, as always, for listening.